My Bible is open to 1 Kings chapter 16. The end of that chapter is going to be our beginning place together this evening. 1 Kings 16. We'll be there here in just a moment. If you will open up there so that we can get into our God's Word together. It's good once more to see everyone out this evening. It is, if I can step back from my introduction there, I try to do this occasionally. I know I say that every Sunday, but I mean it every Sunday, that it is a blessing from our God. It is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing that we get to be together to encourage each other in this way as we would praise our God together. That's not just how Colton opens up sermons. Indeed, it is truly a good thing that we get to be together and to get into His Word with one another. As we get into our lesson then this evening, where so much of our going through the Old Testament has been our taking the things revealed and seeing how God is looking forward in these things. And certainly we're going to be doing some of that tonight as well. But as we go through this story together, I don't want to just look forward. We're going to be doing some looking backwards as we would examine a part of this last week's reading together. And the big lesson that I want to walk away with is that we would truly see about the nature of our God, that it stands not changing over time. He is God yesterday. He is God today. He will be the same God tomorrow. And so as we examine this part of the story, we're going to look a little bit at Ahab and then step into Elijah. I want to bring this theming out that God would show us that here. And then as we recognize that we are able to take that and project that into the future. Speaking from the standpoint of Elijah, we would project that into New Testament times. And speaking from the standpoint of New Testament times, we would be able to take that and project that to you and I today, to see God's character, to see who God is, what God does, how God acts, that stands consistent over the course of time. And so with that, let's consider here in 1 Kings chapter 16 and pick up in verse 29. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Verse 33 needs to stand out as the standout verse here. He does more to provoke God to anger than any of the other kings. He goes back to the sin of Jeroboam. You remember, he establishes all his own unique ways to worship, establishes his own holy days, establishes new places, establishes new gods for Israel to worship. And he says, Ahab looked at that and said, hey, nothing. Let's really start doing some stuff now. Ahab is the worst of the worst. And it's interesting that the historian here would take the time to place verse 34 inside of this history being given. In the wicked days of this wicked king, there's a man named Hiel, verse 34. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son Segub, according to the word of the Lord which he spoke by Joshua the son of Nun. Here's Hiel rebuilding Jericho. You remember that great city to fall in the conquering of the Canaan land. And as Hiel is trying to reestablish this city, it cost him two of his children. That he is going to lose two. You lay the foundation of the city, you lose your firstborn son. You build the gate of the city, you lose your youngest son. And then the historian points out to us, according to the word of the Lord, according to the curse that he laid out by means of Joshua, that Joshua spoke this curse. Put a marker right here in 1 Kings 16. We got to come back here. But go with me back to Joshua chapter 6 and verse 26. In Joshua 6 and verse 26 we read, Joshua laid an oath on them at that time, saying, Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city Jericho. At cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. Now for us, as we have been reading through the Old Testament here chronologically, it wasn't all that long ago that we were in the book of Joshua. Now, it's been a little bit. I'm not saying it was yesterday, but it wasn't all that long ago. And how many people remember that curse? I didn't. I see the head shakes. If you're keeping up with the reading, don't remember that curse, and that's within this year. For them, you're looking at about 400 years. Some put the estimate up to 450. Some would even take it up to about 500 years. But the conservative estimate between the age of Joshua there and the time of Ahab is about 400 to 450 years. And one or two things happened right here with Hiel. Either that curse was not remembered, or maybe it's listed in this day, in the day of the wicked king. That curse wasn't cared about. And if that curse was not remembered after the death of the firstborn son, surely there's a reminder that said, oh, yeah, we weren't supposed to rebuild this city. But we're in the age of Ahab here. We're going to go ahead and rebuild it anyway. And if I've got to lose my son to build the gates, then I've got to lose my son to do what I want to do. But here is what we see right here. 400 years. 450 years, and I'll tell you who didn't forget. God didn't forget. Way back when, by mouth or by Joshua's mouth, God says, if you try to rebuild this city, it is going to come at great cost to you. Do not rebuild this city. And you fast forward to the days of Ahab, and they attempt to rebuild the city, and God said that cost, it is going to be meted out today. It is going to be given today. God does not forget his word. Whether it was spoken yesterday, whether it was spoken 400 years ago, if it was spoken 2,000 years ago, God does not forget his word. He fulfills what he has spoken. And we ought to recognize that from our current study working through the Old Testament as we came into the book of Exodus. And we saw them enslaved by the Pharaoh who would not recognize Joseph. And we carry that 400 years, once more, very close numbers there, 400 years to the past. And God had told Abraham, your children, your descendants, they are going to reside in a foreign land for 400 years. They are going to be enslaved by another nation for 400 years. And in the fourth generation, I'm going to bring them out. A lot of time passes. God tells us how much time passes in Genesis 15 and verse 13. A lot of time passes between that promise and God's action, but God didn't forget it. God remembered what God said he was going to do, and God did it. God delivered his people precisely as he said he was going to deliver his people. Take that forward. God has not changed today. God was like that in Genesis and Exodus. God was like that in 1 Kings. And God is like that now. God says, I'm going to bring judgment. And the scoffers, the world looks at that and says, things are kind of going on just like they've always gone on. Nothing has happened to make me believe there's any kind of change that is to occur here. Nothing's going to happen. And Peter warns, it is going to happen. God isn't being slow to fulfill his promise. God is being patient because he doesn't want people to be lost. He doesn't want people to be destroyed, but he promised it was going to happen. So it is going to happen. And again, it doesn't matter if that word was spoken yesterday, or if that word was spoken in the recording of the New Testament within the first century, or if that word was spoken in the recording of the Old Testament, that as God would speak, I'm going to do this, he's going to fulfill it. And we would see that here in the life of Hiel, living in the days of the wicked King Ahab. God fulfilled what he said in the words of Joshua. And we can take that lesson to ourselves looking back, because God does not change. He is the same God yesterday as today as he will be tomorrow. Coming back to 1 Kings 17. Let's jump into thinking about Elijah here. The text has really been working its way to him, setting up a great foundation for the kind of environment that Elijah is going to be working in. Let's look at the first 6 verses of 1 Kings 17 here. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. Let's pause right there, that we would just recognize. When you go back through in a reading of the law, it is said quite clearly to them that drought is a sign of sin for them. That as they are facing drought, it is because they are not in right relationship relationship with God, such that as Elijah would come in and make this declaration, it ought to be very clear to Ahab, maybe I need to change some things. Maybe that's why this drought is occurring. And certainly we would recognize that Ahab, the wicked king that we have just spent some time describing, is not going to make any such recognition as Elijah would say, as clearly as can be said, you are in sin and things need to change. There's going to be drought. It is not going to rain. And now verse 2. And the word of the Lord came to him, depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook Cherith that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. He's made this declaration to Ahab here. And now God tells him, you go and you hide yourself by the brook Kidron. You go and you hide in this wilderness. And as you are in the wilderness, I am going to provide for you. I am going to care for you. You hearing those echoes of the past there, of God being the same God that he was yesterday, says, Elijah, I'm going to care for you even as I offered care to the children of Israel in the wilderness, that as you are out there, you are going to have food to eat. You are going to have water to drink. I am going to take care of you. And so he goes. And God did exactly what he said he was going to do. He took care of Elijah. He gave him water from the brook. He gave him food to eat. And then we hit a little problem, verse 1. Elijah said, it's not going to rain, which means it didn't rain, which means the brook that he is staying by and drinking water out of doesn't stay a brook for very much longer. Verse 7. And after a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. The brook's dried up. What has happened to God's care for Elijah here? And I asked the question on the screen, what is Elijah going to do with this? As there is a picture within him here of God's care for Israel, will he be like the Israelites? Will he say, you just brought me out into the wilderness to die. You brought me out here so that I would die of thirst. I'd rather go back and be under Ahab than to be brought out here to the wilderness just to die. What's Elijah going to do in this situation? Pause right here. We're going to come back to that question in just a second. But do you see God being the same God that he was with Israel? What did God do with Israel as he led them through the difficult wilderness? It says, you face thirst. You face difficulty, and that is with great intention. Now, it wasn't that long ago that we looked at this in class, but if we could look at this together just briefly, consider Exodus 15 with me here. Exodus 15, picking up in verse 22. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah, Because it was bitter, therefore it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. God tested them. You don't have water. What are you going to do? Are you going to trust me and my providence? Are you going to trust what I have given you to do? Are you going to give yourself over to my commandments and my rules for you? Are you going to trust me that I am your healer? Are you going to give yourself over to me even when times are difficult? Here is the test. And then he takes them to plentiful water. And you take that and you bring that to Elijah. Elijah, here's the test. The water has dried up. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to trust me and give yourself over to my commandment and trust my providence for you? Or are you going to live as Israel has lived in rebellion to me? What are you going to do, Elijah? Which is where we come back to that question. What will Elijah do with this? Which takes us into our next point, where God is going to take care of Elijah. He is going to show Elijah that he is caregiver, and it is going to come from a very unexpected place. Verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Let's talk about bread from an unexpected place. We really need to dig down for a moment and talk about how unexpected a place this is for him to send Elijah to, and to recognize, if you are trying to sit and think of solutions for this problem, it is probably not even going to make the list of potential solutions here. He sends them to Zarephath, which the text points out belongs to Sidon. And do you remember, as we were reading about Ahab and he marries Jezebel, what her lineage is? She is the daughter of the king of Sidon. He's sending Elijah to a place that belongs to the people of what would be his enemy. That here is connection to the wicked woman who would be seeking his life. Build upon that. It says, I'm sending you to a widow. You remember reading through the book of Ruth, and Naomi has a huge problem. Her husband dies. Her 2 sons die. Here she is left a widow, and it's a huge problem for her because here's one who that they are unable to provide for themselves. And God says, that's who I'm sending you to, Elijah. That is who I have commanded. That is who I have put forth here to take care of you. To bring that out even in the text, that we would recognize I'm not just putting in there the idea of she's a widow, so she couldn't take care of herself. The text bears that out as we continue verse 10 here. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. This is what I got. I got a handful of flour and I got just a little bit of oil. And my plan was to go and bake bread for me and my son. We're going to eat just that little bit, and then we don't have anything else. We are just going to die. And this is the one God told Elijah, you go to this one. She is the one I've commanded. She is the one I have put in place that you would be provided for. It's an unexpected place. And Elijah goes. Elijah listens. What will Elijah do? Elijah will trust God. Elijah will give himself over to the service of God. He will recognize that God is his provider. He goes, he meets this woman, and what does he say is going to happen because of what God told him? Verse 13, and Elijah said to her, Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterward you make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. Elijah trusted God, and God provided. He provided from a very unexpected place. But out of that trust, he provided for Elijah. We carried it back to Exodus 15 a moment ago, and then you carry it right into the next chapter, and he provides bread for Israel from a very unexpected place. Don't ever hear about bread raining down from heaven. But that's what God did for Israel, because God is the same yesterday as today as he will be tomorrow. And as you look at tomorrow once more from the perspective of Elijah, perhaps what is being brought to our minds is Jesus looking at a crowd of thousands of people. He says, do we have any food for them? And the disciples look around and say, we got just a few pieces of bread here and a couple of fish. Jesus, okay, that's enough. So start sorting the crowds out here. You set them down in groups and you start dividing that food among them. And it's enough. Enough that there was more left over in the end than they began with. Because the God that was God in the days of Elijah is the God who is God in the days of Jesus, such that he is able to make that providence. And the God who is God in the days of Elijah is inclusive of Jesus, the I am who is before Abraham was. That here we see him do that way back here, looking forward to what God is capable of doing when he walks this earth not once, but twice, of taking just a little bit and saying, I can provide for you. I can meet your needs. Let's continue forth in the story here and pick up verse 17. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. And she said to Elijah, What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son. And he said to her, Give me your son. And he took him from her arms and carried him into the upper chamber where he lodged and laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourned by killing her son? Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, O Lord my God, let this child's life come to him again. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, See, your son lives. It's recorded. This woman's son dies. And she views this as judgment being brought against her. You man of God, have you brought my sin against me that the death of my son would come out of it? And even Elijah is a little bit confused about this. God, why have you brought calamity upon her? Have you brought calamity upon her? I don't quite get what's happening here. And maybe our minds would go back to verse 7. The brook dried up. There is difficulty, there is hardship, and there's a question, what will you do right here? What will you do in the hardship? What will you do in the difficulty? Turn your back on God or turn to God? And of course, we have seen in the life of Elijah precisely what it is that he would do. He would turn to God, and moving upon the boy, he would beg God for God to give him his life back. And God does that. That they would be able to see the God that he is in his care for people. And Elijah would recognize that. But now this woman is going to be able to see it because of what God has done. Verse 24. And the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. I see this about you now. Now, one would think maybe the never-ending jar of flour and oil would be a pretty good hint there. But you come to this place and she says, I see it. Nothing like this has ever been done, and no one could possibly do this except God. No one could possibly do this except the Lord. And as this thing has been done, I see that you are his messenger. I see that you speak his word, and I see the word that comes from your mouth, his word is the truth. Because the greatest sign has been given. My son has been raised from the dead, which would take our minds forward from Elijah to our Savior, thinking about our God's power over death. You remember, as Jesus' enemies, his greatest enemies who are seeking his life, come to Jesus and they say, You give us a sign. And he looks at them and he calls them an evil and adulterous generation for seeking a sign, because he's already shown them, he's given them enough that they ought to know by now. But he says, one sign is going to be given to you, the sign of the prophet Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the whale for the 3 days and 3 nights. The Son of Man is going to be in the earth for the 3 days and for the 3 nights. And just as Jonah didn't stay in the belly of the great fish, the Son of Man is not going to stay in the earth. I like to use the language just because it stands out so stark here. The great fish vomited Jonah back up upon the land. The earth vomited Jesus back out. It could not hold him. God's power over death is seen in him. And then Paul takes that. He comes into 1 Corinthians 15 as he is defending the resurrection from the dead. And he opens up the discussion there with, I preached the gospel to you. I preached the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus to you, and you believed it. He was seen by all of these witnesses. It is well recognized. Jesus is raised up from the dead. And here you are, starting to not believe in the resurrection. Here you are starting to not believe that there will be a bodily resurrection from the dead. And if that is the case, then the gospel that I presented to you is false. The gospel that I presented to you cannot be true. If there is not a resurrection, then Jesus was not raised up from the dead. And if Jesus was not raised up from the dead, we are of all people most pitiful. We have no hope. It's all just darkness and emptiness. But good news, Paul says, Jesus was raised up from the dead. And if Jesus was raised up from the dead, then we will be raised up from the dead. You see God's power at work in Jesus? Then see that he's able to work that same power in us. When you come to 1 Kings 17, and you see the nature of the God of yesterday, that here he has power over death. And you take that into the life of Jesus, who would display the greatest sign that should be recognition of who he is and of God's power, that he would be raised up from the dead. And you take that and you bring that to today and see the very same God that says, I have power over death. Death is nothing. Maybe we can use a little bit of John 6 here. That if you would eat of bread from unexpected places, if you would eat of the bread of heaven, that there is life that death cannot touch at the power of God. We would see that with Elijah, and we would recognize our God is the very same God. He holds that trait and that quality consistently, faithfully, never changing, that we would be able to take our faith and put in him such that our brook dries up. Life gets difficult. Life gets hard. Let's say that even takes us to death. God says, I can take care of that. I can handle that. I have power over death. We would see that in Elijah, and I would hope that we would be able to take that and make that very same application to our lives. We would end this evening asking, is that God your God? Because we will recognize if that God isn't your God, then the God isn't your God, because that God is the God yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That God being the God. Are you living, submitting to Him, walking with Him, such that that day comes and we hear the voice ring out to call us forth from the grave, that we would come up unto a resurrection of life that Jesus talks about in John chapter 5. Are you walking with our God this evening? If you aren't, won't you recognize the power of our God and won't you submit to Him? If there is anything at all that we can do to help you with that this evening, won't you come while we stand and sing the song selected?